One of the key insights economists had already made about the economy is that money is always moving. The circular flow model of income is a representation of that movement, which helps us see how the flow of money helps support the entire economy. In a capitalist economy, households are the owners of the factors of production. Firms purchase those factors, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, from households, which becomes the income those households earn in the form of rent, wages, interest, and profit. Our total national income is usually represented by the letter Y. Households then have choices about what to do with their income. They can buy the goods and services firms produce with those factors of production, which is consumption, represented by C, or they can use that money to pay taxes to the government or save. The savings go into banks, where financial markets use the savings to make loans to businesses for investment expenditures, represented by I. And governments use taxes for government expenditures, G. All of that spending, C, I, and G, goes back to the firms who produce the goods and services, the capital purchased by investment, and the things the government purchases. Together, they total up to our national income, or GDP. And if we add the overseas sector, where we can buy and sell with other countries, we just need to add the net exports to get our familiar GDP equation. Let's see how this works in the circular flow model. Let's start with 6 piles of cash with the firms. They use this money to pay for the factors of production they need to make goods and services, which becomes income for the households. This means our national income, or GDP, is 6 piles of cash. Now, households divvy up that income for their various purposes, such as buying consumer products from firms, saving money in the financial markets, paying their taxes, and perhaps even buying some consumer products made in other countries. But now we have a problem. There isn't enough money with the firms to support our national income of 6 piles of cash. They only have 3 piles of cash with which to buy the factors of production. The insight of the circular flow model is that the structure of the economy will send the other 3 piles of cash to the firms. The financial markets will make loans to the firms, which they will use for investment expenditures. Those expenditures are spent on the products made by other firms. If someone takes out a loan to open a restaurant, they spend it to buy tables and chairs, kitchen equipment, and other items produced by other firms. And the taxes the government collects are spent on still more products made by firms, such as asphalt for roads, agencies which act like firms, and even simple things like paper for their printers. And the US dollars we bought products with from overseas will also eventually find their way back to the US, purchasing our exports or paying for investment expenditures, as we know from the balance of payments. All the money flows back to firms, which means there will be enough to continue to support our national income. The flow of money is always in motion, moving from one sector of the economy to another, but never idle, and always enough to support the level of production that is possible based on the resources we have and the technology available to turn them into stuff. This is really just a representation of Say's law of markets. Supply will create its own demand. But Keynes pointed out there was another way to reduce demand that does not originate from a reduction in supply. Firms can pay households, and households can do their usual spending. But if for some reason they don't trust the financial markets to keep their savings intact, they might just sit on the money, meaning that it never makes it back to the firms, and the firms see a drop in demand for the goods and services they produce, meaning they won't earn enough to support the same level of production. Without enough demand, they will have to lay people off and slow production, reducing our national income and plunging us into a recession. When money slips out of the circular flow like this, we call it a liquidity leak. But don't confuse this problem with people not spending their money. If a family earns some income and they choose not to spend it, they are usually wise to save it in some kind of interest-bearing account, or otherwise just leave it in a bank for safekeeping. That bank is the intermediary which turns the lack of consumer spending to an increase in investment spending by loaning the money to firms, who then do the spending that is needed to keep the income flowing to the family. But when a panic arises and people don't feel safe keeping their money in banks, the financial system crumbles, and with it goes the investment spending, and with that goes incomes. Keynes believed the key to keeping the economy running smoothly is to keep the circular flow of money going. Keynes called this the paradox of thrift. The circular flow of income should ensure that there's enough money to support the production we are capable of and keep us at full employment. But when people are thrifty and choose to stop spending so much money, what remains in circulation is not large enough to support full employment, and people have to be laid off. Keynes argued that even if the money ends up in a bank, there's no guarantee that it will be lent out for investment. In troubled times, banks might increase their reserve ratios and keep more cash on hand in case a panic ensues. But in doing so, they end up creating the panic. The paradox of thrift is that the prudent measures we might take to prepare for a downturn in the economy, such as saving a little more or taking fewer risks, end up causing the downturn. But this alone is not enough to explain why we would get stuck in a downturn. When there isn't enough money in circulation, deflation should cause prices to drop to fit the constraints. For example, in round 2 of this economy, why not split the 5 piles of cash 6 ways and charge 1/6 less for all the goods and services? If we just did that, everyone would be employed, and they could all still afford the same things they were buying before, and the economy continues on as normal at the lower price level. So why weren't people doing this?